Hey guys, in today's video, I'm going to share an incredible, life-changing story of someone who went through a near-death experience, found answers on the other side, and received a powerful message about the future of humanity. Before we start, I want to know where you're watching from. Leave the name of your city in the comments and, of course, if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, take the opportunity to subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any content like this. My name is Emiliano Tezcayotl, and this is the story of how I discovered the light in the midst of the shadows. I grew up in Puebla, a city full of life and colors, but marked, for me, by the absence of my father. He died when I was 2 years old. The accident happened on a cold November morning, while he was driving home from work at a ceramics factory. My mother, Soledad, never spoke much about that day, but I sensed in her silence a pain that seemed greater than any words could describe. My childhood was surrounded by small struggles. Although my mother was a strong woman, her energy seemed divided between supporting the household and dealing with her own sadness. Working as a seamstress, she spent long hours in front of the sewing machine, her fingers always busy, while her eyes were lost in thought. When I asked about my father, she just told me, "He was a good man, Emiliano. I would have loved you with all my heart." I used to look at my father's portrait on the living room altar and wonder who he was. Deep down, I think I grew up trying to be someone he would be proud of, but without the guidance I craved, I often got lost along the way. At school, I was introspective, the kind of kid who preferred to be alone during recess. This made me an easy target for teasing, but the pain it caused was never as deep as the emptiness I felt when I returned home to only silence. Despite this, my mother did her best to bring joy into our lives. Some nights, she would bake pan dulce, and the house would fill with a sweet smell that made everything seem more bearable, even if for a short time. Over the years, I learned to mask my pain with effort and dedication. I worked hard to get into university and eventually got a good job at a marketing company in Puebla. To anyone on the outside, I was an example of success, but inside, the emptiness remained. It was like a constant shadow, following me wherever I went. It was in this context that I met Valeria Montes, the woman who would change my life for the first time. She was vibrant, full of energy, and completely different from me. While I was reserved, she lit up any room she walked into. We fell in love quickly, and I clung to her like she was my lifeline. However, over time, my insecurity and fear of abandonment began to take a toll on our relationship. As much as I loved her, I seemed unable to fully trust her, and that drove her away. After the divorce, I felt like my whole world had collapsed, and that's exactly what happened. After the divorce, my life became a dark, never-ending maze. I lost the desire to socialize, to work, and even to take care of myself. I spent entire days at home, eating minimally and letting clutter pile up around me. The house that had once been a welcoming home next to Valeria now felt like a tomb of painful memories. My mother, Soledad, visited me regularly, worried about my condition. "Emiliano, you need to react," she said, as she tried to organize the mess in the room. "Life won't wait for you to get up. You are stronger than this." But I didn't feel strong. I felt empty, as if an essential part of me had been ripped away and left a hole that couldn't be filled. One afternoon, while my mother was trying to convince me to leave the house, I lost my patience. "You don't understand, Mom," I shouted, my voice echoing through the small apartment. "You've always been so strong, but I'm not like you. I can't get over this." She paused for a moment, looking at me with a mixture of sadness and compassion. "You're more like me than you know, Emiliano," she said softly before leaving me alone once again. The next few days were a blur. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, questioning my own existence. One night, insomnia got the better of me, and I went to the kitchen in search of strong coffee to ward off my tiredness. As the coffee pot bubbled, I felt a strange dizziness, as if the ground were moving beneath my feet. I leaned on the counter, trying to regain my balance, but the feeling only got worse. It was then that my vision started to go dark. I tried to call for help, but no words came out. Everything became quiet. The last sound I heard was the dull thud of my body falling to the ground. When I regained consciousness, I was no longer on the kitchen floor, or at least, it didn't seem to be. I floated above myself, observing my limp body with a clarity that was both fascinating and terrifying. There I was, pale and still, with an expression that seemed both exhausted and serene. This can't be happening, I thought, but somehow I knew it was. It was as if my mind had separated from my body, allowing me to view the scene with cold objectivity. There was no fear, no pain, just a feeling of lightness, as if I had been freed from a weight I had been carrying for a long time. Before I could process what was happening, a deep darkness began to envelop me. It wasn't scary darkness, but comforting, like the embrace of a peaceful night. And it was in this welcoming void that my journey truly began. Floating above my body was an experience as surreal as it was peaceful. There was no pain, fear, or anxiety. It was as if, for a moment, all the emotional burden I had been carrying disappeared. I observed my body lying on the kitchen floor, my arms outstretched and my face expressionless, as if I were fast asleep. For a moment I wondered if he was dead. But even that idea didn't bring the panic I expected to feel. It was just an observation. I remembered the stories my mother told about people who had near-death experiences, about how they described seeing themselves outside of their bodies and finding an inexplicable peace. I always thought they were exaggerations or inventions, but now I was part of this inexplicable world. Is this real? I asked myself silently. There was no answer, but a feeling of acceptance washed over me. It was as if the universe was saying, yes, it's real, and it's okay. As I floated, the view of the kitchen began to fade, like a blurred painting. At the same time, a dense darkness began to envelop me. Strangely, this darkness didn't scare me. It was warm, almost motherly, and brought a calm I hadn't felt in years. I lost track of time as I floated in this void, as if I was being prepared for something greater. Suddenly, a light appeared in the distance. It was small at first, but it grew quickly, becoming brighter than anything I had ever seen. Despite its intensity, it didn't hurt the eyes. On the contrary, it felt inviting, like it was calling me to a place where I could finally find rest. Without me needing to move, I was led towards the light. As I got closer, the darkness disappeared, and a new kind of clarity began to fill my mind. I felt like I was entering a space where time and space didn't matter, where all that mattered was the peace that light radiated. As I stepped into the light, a presence began to form. It wasn't physical, but I could feel her energy, her kindness and infinite love. Little by little, a female figure took shape, emanating serenity and authority at the same time. Her face was familiar, although I couldn't place who she was. His eyes shone with a compassion that seemed to pierce my soul, seeing everything I was and everything I had experienced. "Emiliano," she said, her voice soft and comforting like an old melody. "You are not alone." Those words, simple as they were, touched something deep inside me. An emotion I didn't know existed began to emerge, and tears flowed from what felt like my spirit. For the first time in years, I felt something other than pain. She walked over and held out her hand. "Come," she said. "There is a lot you need to understand." I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I trusted her. Your presence was everything I needed at that moment. I was guided by the female figure towards the light that seemed to expand infinitely. Each step, or what I felt like a step, was like stepping through a layer of something that once seemed so far away: peace, acceptance, and understanding. When we reached a point where everything around me was enveloped in golden light, she stopped and turned to me. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice like a soft chant. I remained silent, watching her. His features were angelic, but there was something deeply familiar in his gaze, something I felt but couldn't explain. "I'm not sure," I replied hesitantly. She smiled tenderly. "I am the presence that protected you from the beginning, Emiliano, and I'm here to help you find what you've lost throughout your life." I felt a weight in her tone, as if what she was about to say was crucial. "You have lived in pain for too long," she continued. "Your heart is wounded, and your choices have been guided by fear. But it's time to understand that there is a greater truth behind all of this." As he spoke, the light around us began to change. Images appeared floating as if they were projections on an invisible screen. The first scene was from my childhood, when my mother, Soledad, carried me in her arms, singing softly as I cried. I could feel her love as if she was reliving that moment. but I could also see the sadness on her face, something that, as a child, I hadn't noticed. She carried the weight of his pain and hers at the same time, the woman said. And yet, he gave his all for you. But you always missed something, didn't you? I nodded, tears welling up again. My father, I whispered. I never knew what it was like to have him by my side. The woman nodded, and another scene appeared. It was my wedding day with Valeria. I saw her walking down the hallway, beaming, while I struggled to hide my nervousness. Reliving that moment brought a mix of joy and sadness. You loved her deeply, she said, but your insecurity made it difficult for you to trust. Why? I was afraid of losing her, I confessed. How I lost my father. As always, I felt that everything I love ends up leaving. She held my hand tightly, her energy radiating warmth. Your fear shaped your life, Emiliano. But you need to understand that love never goes away. It transforms, adapts, but never disappears. And now you have the chance to free yourself from it. Another scene emerged, this time from the night I passed out in the kitchen. I saw my own face, tired and empty, and felt a pang as I realized how much I had neglected myself. Why did you let the pain consume you to this point? She asked, not with judgment, but with a genuine desire to make me reflect. I didn't know how to move forward, I admitted. I thought maybe it would be easier to give up. She came closer, placing her hand over my heart. But you didn't give up. You were brought here because there is still something for you to do. There is a choice to be made, Emiliano. You will see that even in pain, there is an opportunity for rebirth. I felt a wave of emotion go through me. It was as if something within me was beginning to heal, as if the cracks within me were being filled with an energy that I didn't understand but knew was real. Get ready, she said, her voice filled with kindness and strength. What comes next will change everything. The light around us began to change again, turning into a sort of living canvas that showed moments from my life. Each scene was so vivid that it seemed more real than reality itself. The female figure, which I was now beginning to perceive as a divine, maternal presence, remained at my side, watching with me. The first image was from my childhood, a moment I had forgotten. I was playing alone with a small wooden car while my mother was sewing in the living room. I remembered how I used to make up stories to compensate for the loneliness, but then I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. My mother looked at me from time to time with a tired but loving smile. She was there in a way I hadn't appreciated. She never left you alone, Emiliano, said the woman next to me. Even on the nights she cried in secret, she put you first. The scene changed to my adolescence, a period when I was looking for ways to fill the emptiness I felt. I found myself sneaking out of the house to meet friends who weren't good influences. You were seeking belonging, the woman explained. But deep down, all you wanted was approval from someone who couldn't give it to you. My heart sank when I saw the choices I made. Although none were disastrous, each seemed to be driven by the same constant fear of rejection. The pattern was clear now. I was always running, trying to escape pain I had never truly faced. The scenes changed to the time I met Valeria. I saw our first date, our first kiss, and the moments of pure happiness we shared. But, as well as the good times, there were also arguments, growing distrust, and, finally, the painful decision to separate. As I relived the moment I signed the divorce papers, I felt a wave of regret and sadness. I loved her, but I couldn't show it in a healthy way, I confessed. I was so afraid of losing her that I ended up pushing her away. The woman touched my shoulder, a gesture of comfort that seemed to dissolve some of the pain. You need to forgive yourself, Emiliano, she said tenderly. The choices he made were not out of malice, but out of fear. And fear only has power when you feed it. Another scene appeared, this time showing the moment I passed out in the kitchen. It was difficult to watch. I saw my face, pale and lifeless, and realized how much I had neglected myself. You reached your limit, Emiliano, but that was necessary so you could be here now. So I could see what needs to change. Finally, the woman showed me something that moved me deeply. Small, almost insignificant moments where my presence had positively impacted other people's lives. A kind gesture for a coworker, a word of support for a friend, even the smile I gave a stranger on the street. You have never been alone on your journey, and you never will be, she said. Every action, no matter how small it may seem, has an impact. Your life matters. I couldn't hold back the tears. For the first time, I felt like my existence had a purpose, even if I didn't yet know exactly what it was. I looked at the woman, and she smiled. This is just the beginning, Emiliano. There is still a lot for you to see and decide. After the intense review of my life, the light around me began to vibrate, as if it was taking on a new shape. The female figure who had guided me there looked at me with a compassionate smile. "Now you will find the one who can show you the way," she said. Before I could respond, she disappeared into the light, leaving me alone in a space where everything seemed to pulse with living energy. Suddenly, a new presence took over the room. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before, intense, but at the same time, serene. A radiant figure emerged, not with a fixed form, but as a pure and infinite light. It was as if all the love and wisdom in the universe were concentrated in that presence. I knew, without anyone having to say it, that I was standing before Jesus. He didn't speak immediately, but the silence was as eloquent as any words. When he finally broke the silence, his voice was like a river flowing calmly but with enough strength to shape mountains. "Emiliano," he said, "you were brought here because your journey is not yet over." I felt small before him, but not in a humiliating way. It was as if I was standing in front of a mirror that showed not only who I was, but who I could be. "You have lived in fear and pain for too long," he continued, "but now it is time to choose. The path you take from here on out is up to you." With a gentle gesture, he raised his hand, and the environment around us transformed. I saw two different landscapes. In the first, a dark and gloomy path, full of obstacles and silence. It was as if the earth itself was dead, lifeless, hopeless. Just looking at him, I felt a suffocating pain. "This is the path you take when you allow pain and fear to rule your life," he explained. "It is a path of isolation and self-destruction." Then he showed me the second vision. It was a sunlit garden filled with colorful flowers, fruit trees, and chirping birds. The breeze seemed to carry a feeling of joy, and the air was permeated with harmony. In the center of the garden, I found myself surrounded by people who seemed to love me deeply. I felt such intense peace that tears ran down my face. "This is the path of conscious choice," said Jesus. "It is not an easy path, but it is the path of love, forgiveness, and courage." I looked at him, my heart full of questions. What if I fail? What if I'm not strong enough to follow that path? He came closer, placing his hand on my shoulder. His touch radiated an energy so powerful that it seemed to dissolve any doubt. "You will never be alone," he replied. "The strength you need is already within you, and I will always be by your side." With a heart full of emotion, I knew which path I needed to choose. "I choose the garden," I declared, my voice steady for the first time in years. Jesus smiled, a smile that seemed to light up the entire universe. "Then get ready, Emiliano, because your journey doesn't end here. You still have a lot to live, learn, and share." Before I could say anything else, the light around us began to dissipate, and I felt a force pulling me back. The experience was about to end, but his words would remain with me forever. As the light around me began to change, I felt a new wave of energy coursing through my being. It was as if something great was about to be revealed. Jesus looked at me with an expression that mixed serenity and seriousness. He extended his hand, and a kind of luminous screen appeared before us, showing images that moved like scenes from a movie. At first, I saw the earth, blue and vibrant, spinning in infinite space. But little by little, the scene changed. I began to see violent storms, cities submerged in water, and people facing hardships. The images showed not only natural disasters, but also conflict, division, and despair. "The world is entering a period of transformation," said Jesus, his voice echoing within me. "Humanity's choices have brought imbalances, but there is hope. This time of difficulty will be followed by a renewal, a spiritual awakening for those who choose love and unity." The vision changed again, showing people from different parts of the world coming together, helping each other, sharing resources, and living in harmony. I saw smiling children, flowery fields, and a feeling of peace that seemed to transcend everything. It was a striking contrast to the scenes of chaos I had seen before. "But this will not happen without effort," he continued. It will take courage, faith, and unconditional love to overcome the challenges that lie ahead. Then he came closer, his eyes fixed on mine. In January 2025, something significant will start to happen. It will be a turning point for the planet and humanity. Get ready, Emiliano. Not just for yourself, but to help those around you. You have a message to share, even if it's not in words. Your life will be an example. I was speechless, trying to process everything that was being revealed. But why me? I finally asked. I'm just an ordinary man, full of flaws and fear. Jesus smiled, a smile that seemed to dispel all my doubts. That's exactly why, Emiliano. The most humble are those who carry the greatest lessons. You don't have to be perfect. You just need to be authentic and act with love. The vision began to fade, but his words echoed in my mind, as if they were engraved in my soul. As frightening as the warning seemed, I also felt deep hope. There was a purpose in all of this, something greater than I could understand at that moment. Before the light around us completely dissipated, Jesus spoke one last time. Remember, Emiliano, you will never be alone. The force of the universe, of love, will always be with you. And now, prepare to return. I felt a sudden tug, as if something was pulling me back into my body. The experience was coming to an end, but I knew the lessons and mission I received would continue with me. My heart felt different, filled with a strength and peace I had never known before. I felt my spirit being pulled tightly, as if an invisible current was taking me back to where it all began. The light around me disappeared, and suddenly the emptiness gave way to a feeling of heaviness. A distant sound began to take shape, the constant beeping of machines, murmured voices, and the echo of hurried footsteps. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking to get used to the white overhead lights. It was back. The first thing I noticed was the sterile smell of a hospital. My body felt heavy, as if I had been on a long journey. When I tried to move, a low alarm went off, and within seconds a nurse entered the room. "You're awake," she exclaimed, with a genuine smile. "Wait, don't try to move yet. I'll call the doctor." I just nodded, still processing where I was and what had happened. Little by little, memories of the experience began to come back, like a flood of images and sensations that seemed more real than the world around me. Soon after, the doctor entered, accompanied by my mother, Soledad. The relief on her face was evident. His eyes glistened with unshed tears as he approached. "Emiliano," she exclaimed, holding my hand tightly. "Thank God, you're okay." My voice was weak, almost a whisper. "Mom, how long have I been here?" 2 days, she replied, wiping away her tears. "You passed out at home and were found by a neighbor who heard the noise. He called an ambulance. Doctors said it was a collapse caused by exhaustion and dehydration. 2 days. It seemed impossible that everything I experienced could have happened in such a short period of time. But at the same time, I knew that it had been more than just a dream. It was real. I felt it in every fiber of my being. As the doctor explained my condition, I saw another familiar figure enter the room. It was Valeria, my ex-wife. His eyes were red, as if he had been crying recently. "Emiliano," she said softly, stopping hesitantly at the door. "I heard what happened and I had to come." "Valeria," I murmured, surprised and touched by her presence. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I needed it," she interrupted, moving closer. "I know we're not together anymore, but that doesn't mean I don't care about you." There was a sincerity in his words that touched me deeply. For the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine connection with her, not as a partner I had lost, but as a person who had always cared about me. After the doctor and nurse left, they left me alone with my mother and Valeria. Soledad, her voice low and firm, looked at me and said, "You know that God gave you a second chance, don't you? I saw it in your eyes from the moment you opened yours." I nodded, tears beginning to form. "I know, Mom." And something happened while I was unconscious. Something that changed everything. I began to describe the experience, from the moment I found myself out of my body until the encounter with the light and the choices that were presented to me. I told him about the prophetic warning, the words of Jesus, and the mission I now felt I had in my life. Valeria listened intently, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fascination and emotion. When I finished, There was a moment of heavy silence in the room. Finally, she said, "That explains why you look so different. There's something about you now, Emiliano. Something I didn't see before." My mother took my hand again, squeezing it tightly. "Whatever it is, my son, follow it. God has a plan for you." At that moment, I felt profound relief. I had returned to the world, but something about me was different. I knew my journey wasn't complete yet, and now I was ready to face it. In the days following my release from the hospital, the experience I lived continued to echo in my mind. Every detail seemed recorded with inexplicable clarity. One scene in particular haunted me: the encounter with the angelic woman in the light, whose presence radiated incomparable kindness and love. I couldn't forget his eyes. They had something familiar, something that connected me to a place or person I couldn't identify. My mother, Soledad, stayed with me at home to make sure I recovered properly. While she was preparing broth for dinner, I decided to share with her what I had seen. "Mom, can I ask you something?" I began, as I stirred the spoon in the cup of tea she had made. "Of course, my son. Whatever you want." I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of hesitation and urgency. In my experience, I saw a woman. She had such a welcoming look, as if she knew me deeply. She looked familiar, but I can't remember where. My mother paused for a moment, the spoon hovering over the pan. His expression changed from curiosity to thoughtful seriousness. "Can you describe her, Emiliano?" She was young, maybe in her 20s. His face was serene, his eyes. It was as if they carried all the answers to my doubts. And there was something about her, Mom, something that made me feel safe. My mother's eyes began to fill with tears, and she set the spoon aside, wiping her eyes with her apron. "You just described your grandmother, Emiliano, Maria del Carmen, your father's mother." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "My grandmother," I repeated in disbelief. "But I never met her. She passed away before I was born, didn't she?" My mother nodded, sitting at the table next to me. "Yes, his grandmother was a woman of unshakable faith. She dedicated her life to helping others, even when life was hard for her. She and her father were very close. When she passed away, he was devastated. She always said she would be watching over us, even after she left." Revelation left me speechless. I had grown up hearing stories about Maria del Carmen, but I never imagined that she could be in any way connected to the experience I lived. So, she was the one who came to me, to guide me. My mother held my hand, her eyes shining with an emotion I had never seen before. "Yes, my son, she came because she knew you needed her. Even on the other plane, she is looking out for you, just like she did for your father." My mother's words brought a new layer of meaning to my experience. It wasn't just a spiritual encounter. It was a deep family connection that spanned time and space. It was as if I had regained something that had always been missing in me. I spent the rest of that night thinking about my grandmother, trying to imagine what she was like, what kind of life she lived, and how she continued to care for our family even after she was gone. The pain I had carried for years felt lighter now, replaced by a sense of belonging and protection. From that day on, I started to see my life and my family differently. We were not just separate individuals, but part of something larger, something sacred that united us in all dimensions of existence. My life was never the same after that experience. Getting back into a routine seemed like a simple task at first, but something inside me had changed irrevocably. Small moments that I previously ignored now have a special meaning. The sound of rain falling, the aroma of fresh coffee in the morning, the smile of a stranger on the street, everything seemed filled with a beauty that I hadn't been able to see before. However, the most profound impact was on my relationships. I began to rebuild the connection with my mother, Soledad. Before, I saw her concerns as an invasion, but now I understood that they were manifestations of the unconditional love she had always had for me. "You never gave up on me, Mom," I told her one night while we were having dinner together. "I just want you to know that I will never forget this." She smiled, her eyes teary. "I knew you would find your way, Emiliano. I just needed time and, perhaps, a little push from above." Reconnecting with Valeria was more complicated. Even though we went our separate ways, there was a renewed respect between us. One day, I invited her for coffee, something simple but full of meaning. We talked about everything, from our fond memories to the mistakes we made. I don't know if we can fix what happened between us, but I'm grateful to see you like this, Emiliano, alive, present, at peace, she said. I'm grateful too, Valeria. You were an important part of my journey and always will be, I replied. There were no promises to renew the relationship, but we left that meeting with a sense of closure and mutual acceptance. The message I received from Jesus about January 2025 has become a constant focus in my thoughts. I didn't know exactly how I should share it, but I realized that my own life could be an example of overcoming and transformation. I started dedicating time to small but significant actions, volunteering at shelters, talking to lonely people in the neighborhood, and even offering a shoulder to coworkers in difficult times have become integral parts of my daily life. It was during one of these moments that something struck me deeply. A young man at the shelter where I helped asked me, "Why do you do this? Why do you care?" The answer came out of me almost without thinking. Because we all need someone, even when we think we don't. And because the love we give is the love that saves us. This perspective began to shape everything I did. The garden that Jesus had shown me was no longer just a vision. It became a symbol of the life I wanted to cultivate. I knew not every day would be easy, but the choice to seek love, harmony, and forgiveness was one I was determined to make over and over again. In a moment of reflection, I returned to the Popocatépetl volcano, the imposing guardian of Puebla, which has always fascinated me since I was a child. I looked at the smoke rising from its peak, now with different eyes. The volcano, with its latent strength and beauty, was like life, a mixture of destructive and renewing potential. As the wind blew around me, I felt the presence of my grandmother, Maria del Carmen, and the words of Jesus echoing in my mind. Choose the garden. It was more than a choice. It was a daily call to live with purpose and love. And so, I continue my journey. I'm not perfect, nor do I try to be. But every day, I try to be a little better, both for myself and for others. Because in the end, I believe that the garden is not in a distant place. It is within us, waiting for us to cultivate it.